Oh, well, I see William Albracht's name.
Yeah.
Okay, here's what I got here. See, I'm talking to you and I can see you, but this computer is my main computer. It does not have, it does not camera in it. It's what I was using is my laptop, and that does it, won't let me on. So I'm actually, this is the craziest thing. I can see you and I can hear you. So, but you can't see me, but I can join in at any time.
Okay.
And I guess we're gonna have to do it this one.
We'll take it.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight.
Hey, how you doing?
So we'll get started soon. If you want to go ahead and just mute yourselves, that would be great.
You mean introduce ourselves?
No, mute ourselves.
Oh, mute.
Yes, but John will introduce us.
So the reason she says mute is because if any of these people are on here and they're not muted and the dog starts barking, someone's talking, you can't hear what they're saying. And I muted myself.
Thank you.
Super. All right. Go ahead, and I think we can go ahead and get started.
Excellent. Well, everyone, thank you very much for joining this evening during Veterans Week. So celebrating Veterans Day, we're doing Veterans Week, and we have things scheduled all week long. My name is John Gormally. I write under the name of Patrick Greenwood. I'm based here in Carlsbad, California, and we're very honored today to have some incredible people joining our panel today in discussion about Vietnam unfinished business. We are deeply honored today to have William Albracht, who has joined us today. He is the author of Abandoned in Hell, The Fight for Fire-Based Kate. We've also joined today by Bill. Excuse me, pardon me, I'm gonna get my breath here. Bill Taylor for joining on Full Auto, incredible author, incredible book. Len Tran, who has joined us today from Split by the Sea, a Vietnamese refugee's memoir of survival and hope. And of course, last but not least, Miss Amy Lee, who has joined us, who wrote the incredible novel, Snow in Vietnam and Snow in Seattle. Everyone, thank you again for making the time today during Veterans Week. One of the things that was really important about putting this panel together today was really talking about not only during and after the Vietnam War, but when a lot of people think about the war, there's a lot of different perspectives that people had. I can speak for myself growing up in the 1960s and early 1970s. You know, for a lot of us that were very young and not quite, teenagers yet, we didn't fully understand what the war was about. Even years later, I think a lot of people still kind of scratched their head and never understood fully the dynamics of what really happened. But more importantly, what happened to the people that served there and what happened to the people that lived there. And the nice thing about this incredible panel this evening is that all four of these incredible authors have written stories about their experiences in life. And what you're going to see this evening during our discussion is how different these perspectives are, but they're all connected together by talking about how everyone in some way has moved on, moved forward, and has lived an incredible life. But it does start with firstly, understanding. And I think really kind of to open this up, I really would like to start with William. And William, I did have the chance to read your book, Abandoned in Hell, which was an incredible story of your time in Vietnam, serving in the Army Special Forces, and incredible battles, incredible things that went through, not only at Fire-Based Kate, but how your life led up to that as well. William, I guess what I really like to kind of open and ask you is, in the process of writing your book, I was very impressed with obviously the amount of research you did leading into it. But what did you find the book troubling to write? Or did you find that the book really kind of found its own words in its own good time?
Well, first of all, I wrote it with Marvin J. Wolf, who's an accomplished author. And I can't say enough good things about Marvin Wolf. He was the professional. I'm the rank amateur at writing. But I would write, and then he would interpret, and then he would use what I wrote, and he'd interview. So, like I said, we were 50-50 partners all the way down.
Mhm.
What the question was, I'm sorry.
No,
What was
no, that really was beautifully well led in.
writing of the book? I tell you what, like I said, as you mentioned, maybe not. I was in the United States Secret Service for 25 plus years, and I served with a lot of veterans, a lot of Vietnam guys, and it just wasn't brought up that much. We really didn't talk about it that much. And when I got out, I had time after I semi-retired then and did other things, and I sat down to write, just not to write a book, just to tell a story of what happened at Cape. I didn't want it lost because of the brave men that were there and the fighting in this little battle that turned into such a big political deal. Never intended to write it, but when after I got done, and it was literally a cathartic experience. It purged a lot of demons that I had carried around. A lot of guys said, "My God, I didn't know you went through all this." I said, "Well, it never came up." To me, writing it, I'm sure Bill's going to say the same thing. It was an experience. It was something that really did put me at ease and made me a better person once I got all this out.
Well, I got to tell you, the book was incredible. The stories were incredible. What I really appreciated about your writing was that you were incredibly methodical in how you built the story up, not only at the beginning of the firefight, but even after the firefight was over, and how many people were really involved. Everything from the Air Force, the helicopter pilots, the people on the ground, even the ARVN forces, everyone that was there, that really participated. But what I really wanted to kind of get a little bit more understanding by reading your book was both you and Bill talked a lot about the breakdown of discipline. And I really wanted to understand, Captain, from your perspective, before we get into Bill's pieces, why do you think there was such a breakdown in discipline across, not only in what you saw, but obviously across the war itself?
I'm sorry, but I can't really address that. We really didn't have any breakdown discipline. I don't. Are you sure you're referring to my book? Because the people that I had with me, the mountain guards and the artillery guys and my own special forces sergeant, performed magnificently, and they followed every order right down the line, everything that I said and did. Now, a couple of them did break down in that combat fatigue, shell shock, whatever they call it now, overcame them, and literally that can spread like the common cold. So, I had the medics sedate them, and we medevac them out when we could. But as far as discipline goes, no, I had never had one problem with discipline. I would have to throw that over to you, Bill.
Yeah, I'll answer that when do you want me to answer that right now?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. So, when I first started out with my platoon, I mean, we had the greatest leaders I can't even tell you, they were just spectacular. The lieutenant was kind of too gung-ho and too aggressive, unfortunately, because he wanted to win medals. And so as the tour went on, the platoon sergeant was the first one to die, and one of the squad leaders, and then in the next big battle was the new platoon sergeant. He ended up, and of course he was my squad leader, and we got a new squad leader. And what was happening is they seemed to key in on the leaders, and that was a big problem. So then they had to replace all these leaders, and I think that's what the Marines had a problem, because that's the height of the war. And they were looking for leadership. They were looking for guys to replace. There was guys that were, rotating out, and they had to get new guys in. And I think, what we got was people coming in from supply, from offices, that were working in offices, and they were put into combat situation, and they weren't very good. And, there were good guys that did come, but it was my platoon that seemed to get the bad ones. And talk about some really bad. I mean, you just have to roll your eyes and say, how am I going to make it out of here?
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, I think it was, you know, like when We Were Soldiers with Mel Gibson,
Right.
you know, when you see that leadership, he knew right where they were coming. He knew exactly. Put another guy in there, say he gets wounded, say he dies.
Mhm.
And then you get a guy from supply in there. He's not going to know to go to the creek bed. He's not going to send guys reinforced in the right places, you know. And that's exactly, you know, that's exactly what happens.
But
So,
that's, and I think you depicted that really well when you wrote your book as well. And I think, you know, William also really talked a lot about leadership. And that, I think, is one of the most important pieces that people picked up from the post-Vietnam side. I didn't get into service until 1982, and we had a lot of sergeant majors in the 1980s that were sergeants in Vietnam. And they talked about, you know, how important it was to maintain bearing and discipline, because it was challenging. To your point, Bill, you know, you had people that were in supply one day and next day they're, you know, carrying an M16 and they're running up a hill. And a lot of them were just not ready. And one of the things I really kind of picked up from your book, Bill, while reading it was, you remind me a lot of the way a lot of his vision, the way the war went for many young people. You were in high school, you're playing high school football, you went to the prom, you may have gotten into a trade, may have gotten into school, may have done something, and then suddenly you're drafted. And then now you're the doctor of Vietnam. And it literally was a 13-month sprint. So when I read your book about surviving 13 months in Vietnam, it was like you literally were, from the moment from you hit boot camp all the way out to infantry training here at Pendleton to when you were shipped over. It's like, and then what was interesting was the way you depicted it. It was like literally you were like under fire from the moment you even came in, you know, the first time you hit the beach, all the way through to the point where you're on the plane ride home. And literally when you landed at the airport, you're like, pick up your bag and go. There was no transition on, transition off period. How did that have a bearance on your writing when you were writing this book? Did you think about that you literally were a 13-month sprint? Or do you think about it saying, oh, I had kind of highs and lows? Or did you just find yourself running, you know, continuously for 13 months?
you know, when I made it home, I remember the plane landed and I got off the airplane and broke, you know, they had to bring the stairs out back then.
Right.
And, you know, everybody, you know, just walked off the airplane in a single file and then walked into the terminal. I broke the line. I was still in my uniform and I kissed the ground because I knew I was going to do that on that airplane. When I said, I'm so happy I'm going to be home. I had a smile on my face you cannot believe. And then I got back in the line and I walked into the airport, and I wasn't in the airport 1 minute when some college kid was yelling baby killer at me. And that smile went immediately off my face. And I remember looking at him and thinking about, you know, Vietnam, the jungle and everything else. And I'm in the process of writing a screenplay with Ryan Donovan, who's really a great guy. And he and I, so I think the ending of the book is going to have that exact thing. The screenplay where, you know, I'm getting off the plane and then all of a sudden, you know, I go tunnel vision on the guy and then everything goes blurry. And then when it comes back green, you know, I'm back in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And so it's like I never left. And that's the way, you know, there's a lot of good things that happened with Vietnam. I mean, with me, when I came home, I had a hypervigilance about being safe and watching my family. I had, you know, I had a desire to, you know, succeed. I wanted to push myself. And then also I remember I really wanted to, and then my belief in God. I mean, just, you know, I always believed in God, but I never, you know, I always had that little bit of doubt. But when I came home, there's a part in that book and that part of my life that, you know, I thought I was going to die and I was crying out for God. And I remember saying to myself, at the moment of the imminent death, I'm looking to God. Well, if that isn't proof in my eyes, at my imminent death, and then I realized right then there is a God. So, you know, all these things were positive things, but, you know, I did have the PTSD. That's the negative side where, you know, I was very protective of family, friends, and, you know, when anything goes wrong in your life, that's when PTSD kicks in. And unfortunately, you know, sometimes you just can't think straight. You got the anger and you're not going to stop. That's basically how it goes. And you're not going to stop until you win the perceived battle.
Yes.
You know, and there is no winner when you're upset like that.
Very true.
So,
Very true.
So yeah, I came home with a lot of anxiety, and a lot of guys today, the same thing. I mean, these guys are coming from Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're having difficulty. I guess there's like 5 to 8 that are committing suicide every single day, and that's because.
And that's an important point of, a lot of learning did not happen, and I think, one of the things I remember reading vividly during my time was you saw the tactics that were being used early on. I know when you were serving there in the 60s and early 70s, it was like, this was like Korean War tactics. This was like World War II tactics. It was like, we're going to line up. This is where we're going to be. And we expect them to be there. And when they decided not to be where we wanted them to be there, we didn't have that agility, ability to maneuver. And so, William, one of the things that was interesting when I was piecing up your book and listening to your audio as well, is how much the leadership that you learned in Vietnam, doing what you did, how did that transform to your career in the Secret Service? What are some of the things that you took from that leadership, being on the ground the way you were, and then moving it into civilian life?
Well, it was my first time in combat, but I was trained. I had been trained since I went in when I was 18 years old, commissioned as a second lieutenant when I was barely 19. Mm-hmm. The Army brought me along in the Special Forces training and the first couple of assignments I had. Mm-hmm. So when I was put into the Defensive Fire Base Cape, literally hours after I got off the helicopter, it's not like, what do I do? I knew what I had to do. I knew what I had to do, and I knew how to do it. And when your men see you that way, when your men have confidence that this guy knows what he's doing, and I lead from the front, I always have, and I've never asked anybody to ever do anything that I hadn't done or wouldn't do. And I'll take you back to, I'm just 18 years old. I'm an officer candidate school, OCS, or back then I could have been Oklahoma Cook School for all I knew. I didn't know anything about it, except that I was going to it. And this instructor got up there about the first week of training, and he said, "Gentlemen, candidates, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about leadership today, right now in this class." And I was like, oh boy, this ought to be good, pens ready. He said, it's called the 3 M's of leadership: the mission, the men, and me. You will and you must accomplish the mission at all costs. And once you do that, then you must take care of the men that enabled you to accomplish that mission. And once the mission is completed and the men are taken care of, then at a promotions or attaboys that come your way, feel free to accept them. And I led my life that way throughout my rest of my military time, my Secret Service time, my time at Ford Motor Company, and I continue. I always put the mission first. And yes, sometimes it superseded family. Yes, it did. But it was at a sliding scale, because if the family, there's some serious came wrong with the family, obviously they take number one. But it's always been on a sliding scale. The mission with me, normally day to day, comes first. And that is that's the leadership that I had, and the leadership that I always have. Lead from the front, take care of your men, and accomplish the job.
Well, one of the things that's interesting when we talk about leadership, and Len, I got to tell you, when I read your book, and the way in which you went about and how you were thrusted onto the boat, without giving too much away of your wonderful book that you wrote, but your father showed some incredible leadership. And your father had sort of a vision of how he wanted you to have a better life. He just didn't want to tell you about that till farther end. But tell us a little bit about when you went through your journey and you were put on the boat in the middle of the night, not have any idea where you're going, but you went with your father, the man who you trusted, to say, okay, I have no clue where I'm going, but I hope my father has that faith. Tell us a little bit about that faith you had in your father when you were put on the boat.
So in 1982, when I was almost 8 years old, and I was on the boat with my dad with 23 other people. Now, he didn't tell me that we were looking for freedom up until we were on the boat and, we did not see land anymore. But even then, I did not really know what freedom really means, because growing up under the communism, they do not allow you to speak about the war or anything. Every time when I go to school, it's about Ho Chi Minh. You have to praise about him. You have to sing about him. So that day when my dad was on that boat with me, I didn't know what to expect. But all I know is that I am with the man who I trusted most. But with that 21 days of surviving at sea, he taught me many things. And first and foremost is perception, right? Because you got to change your perception, because that first 5 days when we didn't have food or water, and not even having a compass to know where we were going, and the only thing that we can rely on was just the sun. And there were people who just wanted to go back to Vietnam, and there were others who just like, look, why would you want to go back? And I've learned later from my dad that if you were to get caught, they don't just shoot you. They would pick a stone and will crack your skull open and die that kind of death. And so the majority of the people on the boat was like, no, we're not going back. And that's what he taught me, is you got to change perception. He knows that, yes, we are suffering right now, but we have to rewire our mind that, you know what, there is hope ahead, and just keep going. And when we finally got rescued after 21 days and brought to Hong Kong, the refugee camp, that's my first life lesson, is I finally understood what freedom really meant. Because that day when I walked into the Hong Kong refugee camp, there were thousands of Vietnamese people there, kids, adults, and I wonder what is going on here. And this is what my dad was telling me about. This is what other people, other adults were telling me while we were stranded in that boat, is the freedom that we are looking for, because we cannot live under the communist regime.
Well, I think one of the things that was really compelling about your book was obviously the reunion, because the thing that was really important I picked up early on was that your dad made a decision just to take you, and your siblings and your mother were left behind. And then finally, years later, to see how hard he worked to go to school, and how he really encouraged you to really say, look, you're here, take advantage of what you have in front of you. You've got education opportunities. This is the land of, where your prosper is going to come. Tell us about that reunion you had with your mother and your siblings at the airport, finally, 7 years after you departed, that you finally became a whole family again.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that too. And it was just a few days ago that I sat down with my dad and I told him I'm going to have this interview today. And so my dad has six kids, and I was the oldest one, and he chose to bring me along. And so I asked him, I said, Dad, we left since 1982. It's now almost more than 40 years. Can you please let me know, why did you choose me? And so he said, number one, because you are the oldest son. And number two is I can only bring one child along. And then he said, it was a tough choice to make. Either we're both going to find freedom and then hopefully find ways to bring the rest of the family over, or we're both going to die together. Now, I'm glad that he's telling me that now, and not when I was 8 years old. If he's going to say the word death, I'm probably going to panic, like, no, bring someone else. But it took us 7 years later for my mom to have that daring journey to bring along my 5 other siblings, to be on the boat going through what we went through. And the only differences was, when she was in Hong Kong, she was able to connect with us. So my dad was able to sponsor her directly coming to America. Whereas for both my dad and I, we stayed in Hong Kong for 4 months and then transitioned to the Philippines for another 5 months before we were able to get sponsored to come to the US. But it was that long awaited hug that finally I get to see my mom.
And when you came here, I know that you were sponsored, and you were sponsored, I think, by the Lutheran Church, correct?
It was by HIAS, HIAS. It's a Jewish organization, and we're forever grateful that they brought us here.
And I know, Amy, when you talk about role models, yeah, in your book, you explicitly really spent a tremendous amount of wonderful effort explaining the life with your mother and the strength of your mother and everything your mother did to not only bring you to America, but obviously while you were in America as well. What is your kind of earliest remembrance of your mother when you were still in Vietnam and you were still trying to find a way to get out, and all the things that were going on, all the craziness and the family and the dramas and things? But what is the earliest memory you have of your mother, and what really kind of stood out to you?
Well, I left Vietnam when I was 5 years old, so I was very young. And what I do remember about Vietnam and my mom in Vietnam was her lack of cooking skills. We were always being fed by my auntie Six. But unlike most Asian parents, my mom was very loving. She was always affectionate, and just listening to Len and him and just being him with his dad, it brought back so many memories of just feeling that warmth and safety and security with my mom. And I was also sick. I was born with a hole in my heart. I had a congenital heart defect called atrial septal defect. And the doctors, what doctors were there, still left, they didn't think I would live past the age of 5. So to feel that security with my mom it means everything, even though we were in the midst of a war and in the midst of our country crumbling, and just in a matter of days, there was no infrastructure, there was no economy, the piastra changed over to the dong. It was just so much change all of a sudden. But thank you for that question. That's really what I really remember about my mom back then.
Well, you wrote beautifully on not only snow in Vietnam, but in snow in Seattle as well. And I think a lot of the kind of fortitude that your mother had by getting you out of the country and getting you into America, you pass that on to not only your son, but also passing on to your relatives as well, that it is possible to come here. You have to work very hard. Nothing's going to come to you easy. And every day is a struggle. And I guess one of the things I really kind of captured from your writing was that your mother was really everything. Your mother was 100% that lifeblood of what got you here as well. Very similar to Len and his father. His father was pretty much his lifeblood. So, Bill, what in your time, and again, I really wanted to stress a very important point here, is that I am deeply honored with you and William being on this call for a lot of reasons. Many of us that joined the military after Vietnam, when we became of age, we all look back upon the stories of Vietnam, which, again, a lot of this was distorted because we didn't quite fully understand, right? We watched The Deer Hunter. We thought this is the way the war was fought. We saw Apocalypse Now. We watched The Boys in Company C. We got to see Uncommon Valor. We had all these perceptions of, well, that's what the war really was. And truthfully, it really wasn't. So a lot of us that did join in the 80s were like, okay, we hope that we get stationed in the Philippines or Okinawa. And we got to go out and search. I purposely, when I finally became of rank, I used to go around and look up the sergeant majors and the first sergeants and the majors. And I was at one point a colonel's driver, and he was a West Point grad who switched over to the Marine Corps after his first tour in Vietnam. And just trying to listen to their stories, trying to understand, what really is about. And then, Bill, when I read yours, I had to have a little smile because I saw that you were 1st Battalion 3rd and I was 3rd Battalion 5th. So I appreciate you coming to the rescue at Condiem. But I have to tell you, Bill, when I was reading your book, it did remind me a lot of what we were all told in boot camp, right? There was people that were willing to self-inflict a wound to get out. There were people that thought nothing about counting down. I'm short, I'm on the short calendar. How much did that have a bearance on whether or not that the war was winnable, or people were just there saying, I've got 10 days, 9 days, 8 days, 7 days, and everybody else was looking at this person going, stop counting. Okay, let's focus on this.
If you logically think about it, the Cong and the North Vietnamese, they were there for the duration, right? So a guy like me, I made it 13 months. I figured out how to survive. I went through countless number of battles. And right at the point when I knew exactly what I was doing, I got to go home. So then they had to replace me with someone else who had to start all over again and learn all the lessons. Along with all the officers, they had to learn the lessons. And so we kept on making the same mistakes over and over and over. You can't win a war like that. You either say we're going to do it or we're not. And, you know, you can't play like they did in Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, you're going to do 6 months and you're going to go back 5 times.
Right.
It's like that just tears people apart. And you kind of lose sense of back home and everything. You come back with a whole different attitude. And that's, you know, I hear it constantly as I remember when my brother or my husband or my son came home and he was different. He was different. I really have never had anyone say, oh yeah, he came back the same, you know, happy-go-lucky kid. And we were almost all 18, 19-year-old kids.
So
The old timers were the 20-year-olds.
yeah, 25-year-olds. I remember we had a 25-year-old private. It's like, how did you get in exactly? And all of us were 19. It's like we called him the old man.
Yeah,
And it was kind of staggering to see that. But yeah, I mean, 25 back then was old.
It was. And they even looked older. I mean, back then, when you're 18, 19 and you see someone 21, I mean, they look older. There's just no way to get around it. And, you know, if they have any kind of, you know, sense, they can get rank real fast.
No, very much so. So William, in your book you wrote, I was one of the things I wanted to ask you was, did you when did you feel that the war was gone, that it was just like everybody was just buying time and the system was buying time and, you know, the government was buying time? How did you feel being there when it was working, thinking there was a winning path, and suddenly when did you realize we're never going to win this? This is over before it even started?
I don't think I ever really realized that. I can't say that ever came up. But I did feel we took a bad turn. I was in a special ops unit. It was called the Mobile Strike Force.
Mhm.
Indigenous Montagnard, which would be the equivalent of our American Indians, and they were fierce fighters and very, very loyal to us.
Mhm.
And I had a battalion. I commanded a battalion of 400 of them with 12 American Special Forces. And we were a reaction force, and we would go in when one of our camps would be attacked, and it was we'd go in and get some very heavy odds. We had air power, so it worked for us. And we were, particularly in 1970, in the spring, we were fighting at Dak Siang in the Central Highlands. Major battle, lasted about 6 weeks.
Mhm.
And I got hit the 3rd time, and they pulled me out. Now, I was always walking wounded. I know nothing debilitating. And when I was out, I realized what they were doing. They were turning everything over to the Vietnamese, and the Vietnamese just their leadership wasn't what it was supposed to be. It wasn't as nearly like ours.
Mhm.
And the Montagnards that were getting turned over to them did not like the Vietnamese at all. And so they were resistant, and I saw nothing but trouble in the horizon on that. And that's when I started to say, well, how is this going to end? Where are we going here?
Mhm.
If we're going to defeat the North, then let's defeat them. Like Bill was saying, if you're going to fight the war. Be done with it. Go in there, bomb them back to the Stone Age, or just get out. One of the two. And that's when I started feeling that we're going to have to, do something, or we're going to have to go home. And like Bill said, about that time, I went home.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a person in your book, by the way, Charlie Beckwith, and I read Beckwith's book about when he started or was one of the founding persons of Delta Force. And he talked a lot about the Iran rescue attempt in '79 and how much, and you referred to it as a cluster, but very much so Vietnam was obviously in a lot of ways a cluster. But when Beckwith wrote his book, I was really intrigued upon, here was somebody who was trying to build an elite unit with an elite mission to go in the middle of Tehran to try to rescue hostages, and then everything at Desert One just sort of went to hell. Did you find that even years later, after the Vietnam was over, that the military and the government still did not learn its lesson and say, look, you're still thinking this is the way we're supposed to do things, and the outcome still turns out to be the same?
We had rules of engagement, and Bill can address that too, rules of engagement, but basically they weren't enforced. I mean, if someone was shooting at you, we didn't have to identify exactly who they were, or if they were mistaken identity. We were able to engage. The borders, there was no clear marking on borders. I remember chasing. We were on a moving contact in the squad of NVA, North Vietnamese Army, had set up on a kind of in the bush there. And my point man triggered it early, but yeah, we took a few casualties. Nothing tremendously serious, no KIAs. So we dropped the rucksacks and we took off after them. And I'm talking to the forward air controller up above the FAC. We can't do a full charge after it because they could just be going so far down and reset up an ambush, and we'd run right into it. So we're moving quickly but cautiously. And I'm talking to the FAC, and he's got pretty much a beat on him. And he called, my call sign is Hawk. He goes, Hawk. He says they're crossing the fence, which is the border into Cambodia, which we were not allowed to go into. And my response was, you're coming in broken and garbled. Boom, and threw the mic down. And we went after them. And they went in about a half a kilometer, and they broke for lunch because they knew that we weren't supposed to be there. And they knew that we wouldn't come after them. That's how they thought. Because we came online, and that was the elimination of that squad of NVA. When I came back, Colonel called me in. Tell me, did you know you crossed in Cambodia? No, sir. This one's sure. Okay, thanks a lot. Back out, and I went back out after it. Guys in Iraq and Afghanistan, they're getting court-martialed. They're getting court-martialed for what? For defending themselves, for going after the bad guys, going after the guys that are attempting to kill them. Something is very definitely wrong. So the different parts of the machine coming together, and again, back to what Bill said, if you're going to fight the war, fight the war. But this pussyfooting around, no, that is just doesn't let people get killed.
Yes, I think that's really one of the things interesting, that not only what you depicted in your book, but Bill and yours as well. Bill, I think you had a little bit more of a straight and narrow because you had NVA in front of you. You were in the DMZ, you were here, you had areas of opportunity that to be able to do an engagement where I think, William, you were having to deal with the search and destroy and then running across the border, coming back across the border, and then the Ho Chi Minh Trail kind of winding its way through Laos. And I think to your point about Afghanistan, Iraq, I think early on in Iraq, yes, I think that very well true, was it was very difficult for Marines, particularly in the Akbar province, of knowing who exactly they were supposed to engage. And I think later on, as you kind of see, even in places like Libya and Syria today, it's not clear. There's not a clear line, and I guess that we've not learned yet to understand on how do we actually have those engagements in order to deal with it militarily and sadly politically, right? We're still thinking, wait a minute, we can't do that, right? And I think why this is sort of a very important point of your stories is that this kind of feeds a little bit back to Len and Amy a little bit. I mean, you were there as children. And how much of this was really visible to you, Amy, when you were growing up? Did you see the planes, the helicopters, the tanks, the soldiers running through the villages, or was that more kind of disassociated from where you were located?
Yeah, I don't remember much of that. If my cousin was here, he was 15, 16 at the time, he would tell you they were right at our doorstep. We had soldiers that were playing football, and just waiting for time to go by until the next command, next action, whatever. And he would tell me that he was constantly watching these soldiers and wondering, why are they tackling after this one little ball, but it wasn't until years later when I went back to Vietnam and I actually interviewed people and talked to them to really understand just how close the war was to everybody. You could be a little bit sheltered, but everyone was affected. And yeah.
And then I think in your book, you wrote really closely on how the entire system of government failed miserably after 1975, and how you were growing up in this failed collapse system of communism takeovers and the theft and the stealing and the robbing of people, and really turned into complete anarchy as well. And then finally, when you had a chance to escape in the early 80s, and leaving behind so many family, were you really kind of in shell shock as a kid watching all this going on, or were you kind of isolated a little bit from a lot of what was happening to the adults?
Yeah, so for me, like I mentioned earlier, going to school is pretty much, you have to learn how to sing the song, you have to learn how to praise Ho Chi Minh. And I remember there were times where the VC will, come to our house and be like, okay, you have to put up Ho Chi Minh's picture. And they will tell you this specific wall that you should have hung him up. And it didn't happen as much for us who's living in the countryside, but my brother-in-law, who is 12 years older than me, and he tells me a story where when they took over in 1975, 5 o'clock in the morning, every single day, they would, ring the bell and make sure all the kids would, come out, stand in front of their houses and learn how to sing, learn how to praise, of Ho Chi Minh. And that would just go on every single day for years. And if you want to eat, it's not, they're gonna tell you where to go and pick up your food. They'll give you a card. And if you lose that card, God forbid, you're not gonna have a meal that day. And you'll line up and they'll stamp it before they're gonna give you some oatmeal and wheat and rice that will expire for like months, it will just crumble in your hands. So those are the things that I'm hearing now from friends and families who live in the South, and it just breaks my heart. For me, living in the countryside and right next to the beach, it was a little bit better for us. At least the ocean is right there. At least we were able to still fish and have that for dinner, for food.
So Bill, when you hit the ground and kissed the ground when you got home, and then you got up and you had the college guy get in your face and throw the baby killer stuff around, what did you do after that? What was your first day like, or the first 3 days like, when you finally got settled in?
You are just totally disoriented. I mean, you come home and nothing seems the same inside. You have these, these perceptions of what it's going to be like when you get home. And yet when I got home, I was disassociated with everything. They actually had a big party for me. They said it was a surprise party. And they said, make sure you're here at, 4 o'clock. They just said, make sure we've got a big dinner planned. And they didn't say it was going to be a party. And of course, all of the family was there, and I just could care less. I just didn't want to, I just didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to, just try to find myself. And that's what it was like when I got home.
I understand. And William, when you came home, when you had your final tour, what was your first 3 days like?
It was great to be home. Cold beer, girls that I hadn't seen in a very long time, and they were everywhere. It was just like a bit of an euphoria. But I was angry. I was angry, and I didn't know why. And I carried that anger for a very long time. And I would only associate with other vets. We kind of clung together because in 1970, when I came home, it was a very difficult time to be a veteran. A very, very difficult time. Now, I'm not crying in my beer or anything about it. It's just the way it was. But a friend of mine kind of summed it up. Named John Kathman, he was a teacher here in the Quad City area where I live on the border of Iowa and Illinois. And he was home, and he was combat infantry. He was an infantryman out with the Cav. And he was literally from the jungle to stateside in a barn in about 2.5 weeks. So it was February in 1970. He's sitting in this local gin mill up there, nice little place, and it's crowded Friday night, 4:30. Happy hour, and he's waiting for his wife. And this guy next to him, he doesn't know, looks at him and sees his tan, February, Midwest, come on. He says, hey, nice tan. Where'd you get that? And John says, I thought about it, and I looked at him, I said, just got back from Florida. The guy was okay. He says, not because I was ashamed of my duty. No. I serve with honor. My men, we all serve with honor. We did what our country, we went where our country said, we did what our country asked us to do. I just didn't want to get into it. I didn't want to get into it. I didn't want to discuss this with somebody who hadn't been there. And that is the way I felt. If you hadn't been there, and I don't care if you were a cook or a clerk or combat infantry. I don't care. If you were there, we shared a brotherhood. And that's the way I felt. These other people, now I just didn't want any part of them. I was not in the best of moods for quite a while.
So when Amy put this panel together, one of the things that I definitely want to transition to is unfinished business. And I know this is always a very challenging topic to talk about, is everyone always in life has unfinished business, no matter what we go through in life, right? And so, Bill, when you talk about unfinished business in life, from coming home, having that party, not wanting to kind of connect and associate, what really, to this day, now that we're in 2022, do you still consider unfinished business during your time, or did you already have a period of time where you've transitioned and said, okay, I've closed the door, I've moved on, or do you feel still there's some unfinished business for you?
You know, I think it does feel like there's a little unfinished business, but I have to say that I've worked on my healing process. I went back to Vietnam about 7-8 years ago, and I went back to the battle sites and came to terms with it, cried and, just remembered where everybody was getting killed. And to have my brothers with me from Vietnam, my Vietnam brothers, and my son came along too. It was an amazing experience. And then to sit down and to start writing the book, I mean, that was so cathartic. For those who don't know it, it's so healing inside.
It is.
That I feel different about myself. And so I think I've had a lot of completion. I don't think it's all complete yet, but I do feel more positive about my life. And I would highly recommend that people who have these PTSD experiences, that they sit down and just write their memoir, whether or not they're going to publish it, tear it up, throw it away, save it for family members, but it's a healing experience, and you have to talk about it, and you have to get it out. All these guys that I don't want to talk about it. It's a ticking time bomb, and they don't even realize that at some point in time, some major stressful thing is going to happen to them, and that's going to set them off. And I feel like I've really healed myself a lot by working through everything.
Well, your book was great. Your book was great. Your book was.
I want to interrupt there. I couldn't agree with you more, Bill. I couldn't agree with you more. Sitting down and writing it, and if it goes nowhere, but just for your private, it's like you said, it's a cathartic experience. You get to put your feelings on paper, and 100 years from now, your family's going to know what you did. I mean, it's going to be the diary. They'll look back into your perspective of everything. That's why I did it, like you, and it turned into a book like you. And I can't say that enough. Now, something that I guess I should interject, because Bill was just talking about going back to Vietnam. I don't know when exactly it is, probably next year. There's a foundation called the Greatest Generations Foundation. They've taken the Rangers back to Pointe du Hoc. They've taken some of the Army guys to Omaha Beach. They've taken We Were Soldiers once to the Idrang Valley. They're taking a group of us guys who are at Firebase Cape, and we're going back to Cape, going to the ground, and they're going to actually have some of the enemy there, and we're going to talk about the battle. I remember he called me up and asked me about it. He said, "What do you think about that?" And I said, "I don't know." And I decided yes. And so there's going to be about a dozen of us that are going to go back and once again not only face our demons, but faces the guys that were actively trying to kill us as we were then. So this, I am apprehensive, but listen to the Bill talk about it. I guess it's something that needs to be done. That's all I wanted to say.
I think also, William, that could be a book in itself, to be honest.
We're doing a documentary on it, so that's going to be.
That could be a book, The Journey After, and I think, Bill, the same thing with you is that, you can definitely, now that you've written book one, your book two is about that recovery. It is about that, finding that peace. Now, peace doesn't come in the same shape and form for anybody, but I think both of you, the way you've described, especially William, with the chance of going back and actually seeing the opposite number, to say, wow, but the ability to write that, and writing is a great therapy. Sometimes we can't speak, right? But the ability to write, I think, is powerful. So Bill, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing. When I went back also, we ended up, we went down the we went from Da Nang all the way through the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and we ended up in the Quay San Valley. And we ended up in a village just at the base of Hamburger Hill. And the village was like an antique village. I mean, and they had a little hotel. We were in Marine Corps Jeeps, by the way. And we pulled the Marine Corps Jeeps into the hotel lobby because we didn't want anybody to steal them. And it was a long, hot day. And I thought we were just going to go to bed and wake up in the morning and go up to the DMZ and area. And my son comes walking in and he says, well, I just met these Vietnamese people. We're going to have a jam session across the street in a Quonset hut. And it turns out there's a little a way station. It was a Quonset hut. It was dirt floor and had a couple of decks where you could sit. And there was a whole bunch of Vietnamese guys in there. And all of us came over and we sat down with them. And the Vietnamese were singing their songs. And we were singing our songs. I mean, you lost that loving feeling, that type of thing.
All the classics.
Yeah, right. And so the guy sitting next to me had long black hair, but it was kind of grayish. And he looked like an American Indian. I mean, I was looking at him and I go, this guy looks like an American Indian. And he starts talking to our interpreter, and the interpreter tells us, he said, he just asked me, what are you guys doing here? Because this is not a tourist place at all. And she said, well, these were the Marines that fought here in 1967 and 1968. And he said, well, you tell them I was one of the Viet Cong that fought here in 1967 and 1968. But I want you to know, he said, that it was our countries that were at war. And that if I had actually known you back then, we would be still sitting here drinking beer as friends.
Yeah, well, that's, it is commonly said that, governments are the ones that fight the war, not the people. If the people got along far better than the governments ever will. Amy, with the 3 books you wrote, Snow in Vietnam, Snow in Seattle, and the cookbook, which one of the books helped you finally close the book, finish unfinished things, and move forward? Which of the 3 really helped you do that?
Oh my goodness, that's a hard question to answer. I could probably write a 4th, 5th, and 6th book for closure. But let me just start with Snow in Vietnam, because honestly, I thought that was a one and done. I didn't think there was going to be a trilogy at all. I thought there was going to be closure with that one, because it was really to honor my mom, and for me to understand my roots, as I was unearthing things and digging through history, understanding a little bit more about the war, but not just the war. It was really about the refugee experience, finding out how millions of people, for the first time through all the years, all the centuries of wars, right? This was a mass exodus, and hundreds of thousands of people took to the seas, and many perished. For me, there's still a lot of unfinished business for sure. I feel so disconnected still from my family, and I'm afraid to go back to see them because there's that language barrier and not understanding. There's a generational divide. But in Vietnam definitely brought a little bit of closure, because I understood my mom. I understood the hustle and the danger that she put herself in, especially for a single woman. My parents split right after the war. I was born 9 months before the fall of Saigon. And right before it fell, my father left the country to go to the United States with his other family. So as you can imagine, with my mom being there by herself, it was hard, with the sick child, that was dying as well. So, but again, thank you for that question.
Wonderful. Len, you are a walking example of survivability, of hope, and never giving up your dream. And you're living the American dream today. I know you and I have had a chance to talk about, our commonness at George Mason University in Northern Virginia, where I grew up, as well as where you're living. What's book 2 look like? I know you got book 2 coming. how did your life coming over from Vietnam, being a survivalist and coming to America and having to grow up in New York and do all the things you had to do, how did all this influence book 2 coming out?
So it's kind of funny that I would never consider myself to become a writer, and let alone to write anything more than 10 pages. But I would say my life changed in since 2000, when I made that decision to move from New York City to Virginia, especially Northern Virginia. Now, Northern Virginia has a big population of a Vietnamese community. And lucky for me that I was able to connect with so many people, Vietnamese veterans and families that have stories that are way worse than mine. And being able to listen to them, that's what sparked me to write my book. Because writing that book, just like everyone else, Bill, William, and Amy was saying, for me, it was therapeutic. It was resolving some of the questions that I had, but then at the same time, it sparked new questions as well. I want to know more about our heroes. Vietnam has a rich history. It goes back to thousands of years, and we have, generals that were willing to sacrifice their lives just so we can have a country. And so, I don't know, I'm working on a second book right now. It's more of a motivational book, but every single examples that I use in there, it all pertains to how I came to America, all the obstacles that I faced. But you never know. The third book might be about the history of Vietnam, about the heroes that gave me the freedom that I have right now.
Well, I got to tell you, thank you very much for that. Because again, I'm looking forward to book 2, as you know. I can't wait for it to come out as well. So a little perspective here to give you my perspective. I've had the chance to get to know all of you through your books. And obviously, Amy, and knowing you on a personal level, and Len as well. But to give you a perspective of why I wrote Sunrise in Saigon, which is my first book, which is due out November 30th. And one of the things I wrote early on, again, this was a fictional, kind of historical fictional novel inspired by true events. But my first really recollection of Vietnam War was April 30th, 1975, when I was 11. And I remember hearing on the radio that Saigon had fallen. And this was an AM radio. It literally was, we're interrupting this broadcast to inform you that Saigon has fallen. And I remember waking up that time going, what fell, what happened, why, what happened? And I began reading the Washington Post and all the newspapers of the time, trying to find stories of understanding. And the one that really compelled me to want to really continue this desire was the Catholic nuns in Operation Baby Lift. And I was so compelled upon that story of saying, okay, they could have gotten out, the first plane crashed and there was a lot of tragedy, but what happened to the nuns? And being raised Catholic, I always wanted to know what happened to the nuns. I never found out. So even when I was in my time in the 80s, I was hoping to find somebody that say, do you guys ever remember this story? And to Len's point, many Vietnamese say, no, the government blocked all that history. And when I finally got a chance to go to Vietnam in 2012, I actually went for a cycling event. I asked everybody in the hotel that I was staying at to, just people that I just ran into saying, hey, do you guys remember the story? And everyone went, don't remember. Finally found somebody that said, okay, you need to go to the Notre Dame Cathedral. You got to go find this particular priest or this nun. And they finally led me to the orphanage in northern Saigon, where the actual nuns were still living. And I got to find 4 of them. And I had the chance of actually asking them that question, why did you not leave? They said, no, not all the children got out. We were compelled. And I think that when you feel that sense of commitment and that sense of belonging and that sense of purpose, is like all these nuns had was the cross on their shirt. That was their only possession of life. And it really was profound for me to go back 3 times and get involved in owning a water business there. And because the kids were, drinking really just sugar. And then now, obviously, with the charity I'm involved with, Helmets for Kids in Vietnam, where the coffee and my book sales or proceeds of that go to help support that charity there. It's because it's just it was such a mystery to many of us. I know William and Bill, you're much older than I am, but growing up in that time, many of us had no idea, like, whoa, it was over before we understood. And even today, we still don't fully understand everything that was behind the war, behind it. But to see you 4 amazing people not only survive, but to thrive and build a life for yourselves and your families, It is my honor today to be your moderator. And when Amy asked me to do this, I was choked for words for 2 weeks reading your books and listening to your audios and going, I just need to really understand that. And I wanted to thank all 4 of you today for your stories and being here today. This was a very special event. We're going to obviously rebroadcast this on Veterans Day on Friday, but I wanted to thank all 4 of you, not only for your books and your writings, but I hope that you continue to write, continue to produce content. You have people like me that are going to read it, and I'm going to put it on my channels as well. But very much all 4 of you, thank you very much for what you wrote and obviously your experiences as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everybody who's joining as well. Thank you for being curious and wanting to heal with us as well. And I feel honored, very honored that you all agreed to be on this panel when I just had this crazy idea to bring us all together. You know, Mr. Bill Taylor and I, we celebrated 1 year today, actually. We met a year ago in California on a panel. And Captain Hawk, it's an honor to meet you as well. And Len, I get to see you tomorrow night. So what a crazy, crazy thing. And John, hopefully we'll get to see each other in Carlsbad. But, you know, when we started this, I think we just were so excited that we totally forgot the intros. So hopefully those of you who joined know who we are and the intros and the bios, but feel free to connect with us afterwards if you'd like to learn more. And I did see a question in the chat. John, do you want to read that for us? It's from Jessica Dillingham.
Yes, when you were drafted, were you originally for the war? I'm curious in how views changed being drafted and being after. So I think this is for William, or no, this is for Bill. Bill, is this question for you?
I joined the Marines for 4 years, and I joined with the idea that I was going to go into aviation, and that I wanted to be a mechanic. Of course, back then they needed people, they needed bodies in Vietnam, and they would have told us anything. And so in boot camp, all the boot camp was through, and all it was is, the list comes out and it said, Bill Taylor, Westpac Ground Forces, 0311. I go, I'm going to be a rifleman in Vietnam. What's this all about? So yeah, then once I did my tour, once it was over, but getting back to, I joined the Marines for 4 years. And back then, 1966, when I joined, you could join for 2 years. And unfortunately, the courts were doing something pretty nasty. One of the things the court was doing was, okay, you're in front of me because you stole some goods. And so my ruling is either you go to jail for 2 years or you join the Marines for 2 years. What do you want to do? And that's how we got a lot of guys, believe it or not. I know that the courts made them. And of course, that's not the kind of soldier you really want, but they just wanted bodies over there, that's all. So thank you for that question, whoever it was.
Anybody else have any questions?
I'd like to interject a story. In 1996, we had a reunion, a Special Forces reunion at Fort Bragg. And it was really the first one I'd ever been to. At the dinner, the kind of black tie dinner that we had at the conclusion, Colonel Bo Greitz was there. Bo Greitz was legendary. He was a legendary officer in Special Forces, and I had met him briefly in Vietnam in like a group. And I'm telling you, this guy was something else. I mean, something else. So I saw him there, and I walked over to him. I said, Colonel Greitz, and he goes, yeah. I said, Bill Albracht. I said, we met in Nha Trang in 1970. I just wanted to say hi again. He goes, you were there with the 5th group. That's 5th Group Special Force. I said, yes. He looked at me and he shook my hand and he said, welcome home. I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned. No one had ever said that to me before. No one. I got home in 70. It's now 1996. And he said, welcome home. And I was so moved by that. I said, well, every Vietnam veteran I meet or know of, now I will say welcome home. and I didn't start it for sure, but it's spread like crazy. And when one Vietnam veteran meets another, we do say welcome home, because we never got that. And again, not whining or crying or anything about it. It's just the way it was.
Yeah.
So now when we see each other and we meet each other or see a hat on that a guy, you'll say to them, welcome home. And when somebody says thank you for your service, I tell them it was my honor to serve. Anyway, just wanted to relate that little story.
Thank you. That's something I think we should do for all veterans, because I think a lot of them, especially the ones that Bill, you mentioned about the Afghan and the Iraq tours. I don't remember in any of my time, you did 6 tours in any zone of opportunity. You maybe did 1 or 2, and then you lived in Hawaii. They put you in Pendleton for the rest of the tour. You didn't do repeating pumps like that. And I
Right.
think that really is how the times have changed dramatically from when they were 25, 30 years ago.
Right. You know, I remember coming home and putting my sea bag in like the attic and forgot about it and said, I'm done. I don't want to even mention the military thing. And it went on for so many years. And then in the 1980s, I think it was, Chicago had this welcome home parade. And I went to that. And I cried my eyes out walking down the street of Chicago. Because for the first time, that was an acknowledgement. And it made a difference in my life. And so I've been, working at it ever since, trying to get it all straight. And I knew I was going to write this book, but I just had to wait to do it. And it did take 3.5 years to get this book out of because the stories are so, to me, they changed my life. And to finally get those stories out, it was amazing. I've got to tell you.
Well, please keep writing, all 4 of you. Please keep writing. It's as I mentioned, it's great therapy, it's great healing, but more importantly, it helps you dig up the good side of the memories, not just the bad sides. Right. One thing I will tell you about writing, is it's important to know that it's not all doom and gloom. There is a way of your soul finding the way of saying there was some good that came from this event. And I got to tell you that just sometimes it does take you a while to kind of scribble down and write it out. But thank God we have word processors that we can delete and erase, on the flick of a fly. And then you can get rid of the bad words as well and all the other stuff. But I think it does help. It does help unlock mentally that head going, you know what, that actually was a good moment. There was a positive moment. And I think that it came out in all your books. That all the words that all 4 of you wrote that I read, every one of you had something that came out saying, okay, this was a good moment, right? And I really enjoyed that in your balance. I think all 4 of you wrote very well balanced. But I think keep writing. I think you'll discover that there was a lot more good that you didn't realize before.
Right.
So,
Thank you, John.
Amy, I know you wanted to do the wheel, and we do have some people on. So did you want to spin the wheel and see who wins what?
Let's spin the wheel. Yeah. All right. Well, let me go ahead and share my screen. And let's hopefully I pick the right screen to share. All right. Can you all see my wheel there?
We see your email. Now we see your wheel.
Oh, there it is. Yes.
Okay, so if you registered for tonight's event, you are in it to win it. And we're going to give away 5 prizes tonight. And let's start with the first one. We'll do On Full Automatic by Mr. William Taylor. And this winner will receive an autographed copy sent to them. And here we go.
We should have some music with this.
Oh,
Oh, she's still here. She said she was leaving.
we'll get Bill Taylor's On Full Automatic.
Love to send. I'd love to send.
We'll connect you via email. So let's go with Captain Hawk, William Albracht, and we got Abandoned in Hell. Signed book. Ang Lang. Awesome. And I think she left because she actually had an audition to run to. She's from Australia. She's French Vietnamese and also a refugee living in Australia, who wrote a memoir, and she's looking for an agent. So any agents out there, that's the one you want. Okay, moving on. We'll do Len Tran, Split Up by the Sea, a beautiful memoir that just debuted in October. And the autographed copy goes to Min Pham. Okay, we'll find out who that is and get that over to Min. All right, John, let's have you be up next. We'll do I think it's a pound of coffee from Cycle Rider 3 Espresso.
Right, and one mug as well.
And one mug. And I will vouch for your coffee. It is amazing. we love the cinnamon one, which I think is the Sunrise in Saigon one.
Correct.
Okay. Too bad my name's not in here. Excellent. Kathy Fox, congratulations.
Excellent.
All right, so we got just one left, and that is a signed copy of Snow in Vietnam, which is my debut historical women's fiction. Julie Tran. All right. Awesome. Did I get that right? Yeah, Julie. Okay. Am I missing anybody else? I think that's all the prizes we have. Okay, I'm going to kick it back to you, John.
Excellent. Well, everyone, thank you very much for making it for this evening's event. This has meant more to us than you'll ever know. Having these four amazing people, having the honor of being a moderator to this event. Amy, thank you very much for having me as well. All of you that joined here around the world and those watching on the rebroadcast on YouTube, we'll be putting the link out on Veterans Day Friday so everyone can be able to see this event again. We hope that you share the event with among friends and family. You have four incredible writers in front of you that have written incredible novels. Not only read their books, but look after potentially their next books they have come out. Follow them on LinkedIn, follow them on Instagram, follow them on Facebook. If you really want to see writing from the soul, these four people have written from the soul, and I really highly encourage you to check out their books.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank you so much. Yeah, you did a great job moderating, and really appreciate. And I think it turned out just phenomenally. I think so.
Thank you.
And Amy, thank you again for putting such hard work into it, just like you do everything.
Well, I love what I do. I love bringing people together. I love learning about our history, and learning all sides of it. I think for so long, the war has been written with one lens, and more as we begin to heal, we are having more stories come out from all different angles. And I encourage everybody, like you said, John, to write your heart out, because I guarantee you, no one's heard your side of the story. And you might think it's diluted. You might think it's already been heard. You might think that you can't write. And you know what? We have ghostwriters for that. Thank goodness for ghostwriters.
Absolutely.
And actually, John and I are ghostwriters. So there you are. There's no excuses.
None whatsoever.
Yes.
I want to say thank you very much, John. And it's great when you have a back-to-back interview with John, 2 weeks in a row. And I'm looking forward to a third one. And nice to finally meet you, Bill, and William as well. Looking
Thank you,
forward
Bill, William, as well.
see you in the future. And Amy, I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Yes. Don't forget to pick me up.
And to everybody else too. Yes, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. And I really, really enjoyed hearing your stories. I really did. It's just a wealth of good information to have. Thanks again. And great moderation too, I might add. I like your vignettes.
Thank you, sir, very much.
I'd like to also thank all the guests that took the time to be here, and wish everybody a happy Veterans Day.
Yes, Veterans Day week, Veterans Day week.
And happy Marine Corps birthday. Hoorah!
Hoorah, Semper Fi, of course.
I love it. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.